everyone. This is Samantha and Zemsky.
Yo, it's your boy George Philip, the first, back from vacation.
Yeah, and this is Masculinity, you guys. I hope you missed us. We certainly missed you.
Here's what I do on my vacations. I go to a restaurant. I order the worst thing on the menu. And in this case, let me just get ready for this. It's a double cheeseburger or double burger thing, but instead of buns, each bun in between the two pieces of meat, so 3 buns, are grilled cheeses.
That's
so
fucking awesome. What are you talking
one
about?
grilled cheese, one beef patty, one grilled cheese, one beef patty, third and final grilled cheese. And I smacked that shit in like 2 minutes.
But wait.
And if you're about to do the whole, it's vegan, how can it be a grilled cheese? I'm sorry, were you sitting like on your porch one day, like churning putrid old milk and then be like solidified into something? You're like, you know what? We should eat this and call it cheese. Was that you? Were you that person?
Oh, God.
So let's just chill on the whole like, it's vegan, so how can it be a cheese or burger? All right, whatever.
Well, I got confused because you were like, it's a beef patty. In my mind, I'm just like...
It's one of those Beyond Burger beef patties, which aren't that great, but they're fine.
I'm sorry.
But the grilled cheeses were fantastic. And it was 3 grilled cheeses with 2 burger patties in between.
Anyway, so that's that. What's been going on with me? I mean, New York has been great. It rained a lot while you were gone, but then it got really nice, and because of that, it's just been a wonderful thing.
Are we having a spring? Like, I feel it's still like springish. Like, it hasn't jumped into summer yet.
I think it's still springish. I
We
mean,
aren't
it's
sweating our skins and balls off yet.
I mean, yesterday was pretty warm, but yeah, I went and saw Deadpool this weekend, which was lit.
Yeah, let me tell you something. I saw Deadpool on my vacation. You know what I did when I saw Deadpool on my vacation?
What?
I paid for a nap.
You slept through Deadpool?
I definitely slept through 3/4 of that movie.
Oh my God!
But it may not have been the movie's fault. It was one of those movie theaters that had like the reclining chairs.
Oh,
and, like,
okay.
And I was on vacation. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take a nap.
Good for you.
Take a quick 20.
Yeah.
Turn into like a quick 45, but
Oh
it was
my
cool.
God. The pool's fine. I love Ryan Reynolds. And actually, if you guys follow us, our social media, you know that we posted something about Ryan Reynolds having anxiety. Like, he actually like spoke out about having his own issues, mental health. I mean, it is still mental health month for at least, another week. So, we're still thinking about that. However, we are going to take a slight detour today and talk about some things that have been going on in L News. So there's a lot of recalibration going on in our society right now. This recalibration, this course correction has to do with what's expected and how we see each other as human beings. And so Ramon and I think we should go ahead and just join in. So today we're going to use what's happening with the NFL team in Washington, D.C.
We refuse to say their name. Go for it.
Great. I love that. And the Junot Diaz misconduct allegations. I mean, this happened a few weeks ago at this point.
This is going to be a tough one for me,
Yeah.
And I'm an asshole, so go ahead.
Well, I mean, we already had a little throwdown earlier today, which you were not privy to. But anyway, so, and then we'll have another one of our Champagne Papi / Teddy Perkins segment. Except, have you seen the Champagne Papi episode?
Yeah, it's kind of lame.
I mean,
it was.
That
I got
stereotype. I was like, okay, I'm tired of the stereotype.
Whatever.
Anyway, whatever. Okay, so we're going to have a Champagne Papi / Teddy Perkins segment where Ramoy is actually going to be sitting down with a country musician by the name of Ryan Culwell and talk to him about what it's like to be a dad and what it means to him. So,
yeah. So, for those who don't know, like recently the New York Times broke a story where, again, the Washington, D.C. professional football team, their cheerleaders exposed how, like on a photo shoot trip to Costa Rica, the team brought along some of the team's sponsors and some of the stadium like suite holders, and who were all men, and they were invited along for this private photo shoot in Costa Rica.
Yeah, and then one night after an extensive day of dance practices, 9 of the cheerleaders were made to go back to the hotel, get dressed up, and be the guests of some of the VIP guests who happened to be men. And in a way, they were kind of made to be escorts for these like rich men.
Which is, awfully disgusting but, kind of typical for the NFL to do. But we could talk about, the objectification of women's bodies, or, talk again about the sexual economy that's become so normalized in our terrible world. But what I find interesting here is that, it's similar to what we discussed with the Harvey Weinstein reckoning. It's that notion, like in quotes, like, I mean, they're cheerleaders, so isn't, this the story that's something that always happens? Like, casually in conversations, I'm sure dudes, young men, people were like, oh yeah, but isn't that what cheerleaders are supposed to be like? What's so problematic about that? It's that expectation that women are here to fulfill the role of being a sexual object, a second-class human, and how we for so long have expected that because it's become so normal. Then that's what's interesting, is that whole paradigm is kind of shifting so dramatically right now. Like, this story can come out and challenge that conception that we've so easily normalized. And, we also want to talk about how we as a society as a whole are trying to deal with this and heal from this and make change, kind of like with our masculinity podcast.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so so like, I get it. Okay. And I'm not a dude, right? So I'm not saying that I know what it's like to be in the shoes of somebody who has to who previously had kind of just free reign to just talk to whoever, however, how they please, and now having to kind of restrict that. I don't know what that's like. Fair. Okay. But I will say, I feel like all of these things that are coming out, maybe it's implicit to say so, but I just feel like they're kind of common sense. All this shit that's coming out, the Harvey Weinstein and the Matt Lauers or whatever, locking fools in their offices. Okay, that's obviously people coming in plants. That's obviously very extreme, right? But I just feel like there are other things such as for example, this story about treating cheerleaders as an escort. Why?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, common sense would say that this is just wrong. We treat each other as humans and not sexual objects. However, I mean, this is in part the whole conversation we're having with this masculinity podcast is the performance of said masculinity has become so normalized, and our culture has created this curriculum for what it means to be a man, and that in and of itself means to be so objectifying of women and a performance of these hypersexual animals that is a human male, that it's become so normal to treat women as objects, even though in the back of our minds or even in the front of our minds we know that's wrong. To fulfill this to fulfill the fraternity of being a man is we treat women like shit, or we women are sexual and we are hypersexual. That takes the forefront. So the performance of masculinity and the performance of being a part of the fraternity that is masculine takes the forefront over common sense or thoughtfulness or of just humanity.
I mean, and I think that I feel like the performance of masculinity is so interesting because it's on one hand, it depends on dominion over women. On another hand, it also depends on men, other men, recognizing your dominion over women, and in a certain sense, your dominion over them, right? It's you have to kind of just exhibit these alpha qualities, but as we're changing, as things are changing, and we are recognizing that there are actually a lot of women who inhabit these alpha qualities, these leadership qualities, these qualities that are usually associated with masculinity. I mean, I'm sure that some of these cheerleaders are probably have alpha personalities, right? And it's then to have to be okay, I gotta all of that has to be muted, right? We talked about muting last week the week before last with Dr. Cartman. And it's you have to just mute yourself. You have to mute who you are. You have to mute yourself. And it's I'm sure that in that crew or whatever of the men who were being I'm sure there was somebody who was I mean, honestly,
yeah,
I just want to take you to dinner. I don't really need for you to come here as
sure. I mean, I think it's we always talk about complicity and so on and so forth. It's that complicity into the action of the negativity, because what other option do you have? Otherwise, if you come out to challenge, you're immediately outcasted of the pack, right? And you're ostracized, and you're whether it's explicit you're soft, or it's just you appear soft versus the strength of what we know is what is supposed to be masculine. And that is a hard place to be, and to be isolated by yourself, to be nah, bruh, you're cool. I appreciate you as a woman and as a human, as a dancer. Like, you don't need to be an escort. You don't need to be my partner. I'm not here to show you off as some sort of eye candy, or I'm not here trying to have sex with you in the night and you feel obligated to because of the power dynamic. That would be a hard position to be in, especially in that role, because we've generated such like stringent rules of what it means to be a man, especially a man of power and money and authority.
And what it means to be a woman.
Sure. And like, it's not to say that women don't want to be, or people, just let's take that label off of gender, but like people in certain situations don't want to own their sexuality, don't want to be, provocative, don't want to have the ability to enjoy an experience. But it should be where it's like in an equal sense, where it doesn't feel like a human has to feel pressured or has to be forced to be in an object role for another person, where it's not for their experience, right? It's not for the pleasure for themselves, but it's for fulfilling the pleasure for someone else.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I feel like in the sense what you're pointing to is like on some level, it's like none of us are really allowed to own our sexuality, right? Men, women, everybody along the gender spectrum, like
within themselves, right?
We're not.
It's a performance.
It's a performance. It's something that's to be used for the benefit of society at large. Because we're in a patriarchal society, obviously, there are
rules.
Right. There are rules. There are ways in which, like, men still have a lot more freedom when it comes to that. Like, I mean, I'm thinking about the fact that, to be a dancer, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and act like I know anything about cheerleaders because, or like what goes on in the mind of the cheerleaders, because I don't, right? Like, that's not the type of athlete that I was. So, but they're dancers, they're athletic dancers. And it's like, that's like an art in itself. That's an expression of the self. That's something that they choose to do. And like, yeah, I mean, a lot of times it can be quite sexy. A lot of times it can be quite alluring. That's not to say that it's not theirs. Like that sexuality or that, that sexiness, that allure that they have is for them. That's something that they're cultivating themselves and that they're expressing and they're enjoying because they're expressing themselves. That's not for somebody else to take. It's not for somebody else to then be like
capitalize on.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh yeah, let's take us over, so you guys can entertain the guests. That's fucking crazy. Like, these are grown ass women. It's insane.
Yeah. I don't even know how to have this conversation, everybody.
Romoy's face.
I'm so
just perfect.
Tortured and in turmoil about this conversation. And I know like there's a right angle for this, but I also know like I personally am so invested in this that it breaks my heart, but I also knew it was going to happen. Anyway, so a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, like I was on the Twitter in the middle of the day, and the Twitter tweeted at me some things about Sherman Alexie and all these things, all these sexual allegations and these power dynamics that came out about Sherman Alexie. For those who don't know, Sherman Alexie was a novelist, short story writer who's Spokane Indian who like wrote these powerful and tragic short stories of what it meant to be a young person within the Spokane population in a part of the world and part of America that is, a colonized part and that is a tortured part because of colonization. And he was an incredible writer, but then it turns out he used a lot of his power and prestige that came with the fame of being an incredible writer to manipulate women and to manipulate people and to get sex and enjoy a place of power that happened. And when that happened, I was like, fuck. Junot Diaz is going to come out soon. And I knew it. There's been like a rumor mill around Junot because he's a little bit of a womanizer and he's a little bit like he's incredibly charismatic and incredibly charming. And he used that along with his prestige of being another famous and talented writer to his benefit. But then before that, he publishes the story in the New York Times or the New Yorker about how he was raped as a young boy. And it was a very well-written piece, and it was very powerful. And it really opened up the conversation for what it means to be a man and talk about sexual abuse. And we've had this conversation before, how men are victims of sexual abuse. And that happened, and that was powerful. But then a few weeks later, it comes out that, a couple of women have come out explicitly about how Junot has used his place of power to be violent, like vocally towards them. And he used his power to be like very sexually physical, like he forced kisses on women.
Zinzi Clemens, yeah. He
unwarranted kissing. Yeah. And, and Junot didn't really reply with the most apt apology of some sort, but he did make weight about how his trauma has led to these things. And it's created this, very hard place for a lot of people because Junot is such an advocate for, he's Dominican and coming from a place of the Dominican Republic that has been on the wrong end of a lot of patriarchy, toxic patriarchy, and then also colonialism, very horrible colonialism and racism when it comes to Dominicans and the Haitians, and
within Dominican culture,
sure, within any sort of brown color, like the idea of white supremacy and what that means. So he's been an advocate for that and created a lot of conversation for that, but also within his stories and his writing, but then also within the conversations he creates through panels and Q&As and so on and so forth, where he's an advocate for women's rights and where he's an advocate for Latinx and where he's an advocate for any sort of gender minority, ethnic minority. Like, he is the biggest proponent for those people. So that makes a very convoluted, complex conversation. So you have this guy who is an advocate who writes stories based within trauma and tries to expose trauma but give a safe space for people to heal from trauma, who creates safe spaces for all minorities to be heard, to have their conversations be at the forefront of all the conversations that he is around. But then it comes out that he, within the last, and let's be honest, this was a long time span. It's between the last 5 years and 22 years that these allegations came out, or that these events from the allegations happened, right? So it's a very complex conversation, but still at the end of it, which I have to be honest about and I have to acknowledge about, the part is there are victims to whom Junot Diaz, victims to his fame and his notoriety and his place in position of power as being a powerful man. And even if he was on the wrong end of trauma, there has to be the acknowledgement that he used his power, whether he was a victim at one point or not, to then victimize others.
I mean, I think it's tough because one of the things that, you mentioned before we started recording is that, because my thing, so I don't know Junot Diaz, Ramoy knows Junot Diaz, let's put it that way.
Oh, Junot's my Jesus, and now Jesus has turned on me.
Yeah, I don't know Junot Diaz like that. I read the story.
If anybody looks in my inbox and just search Junot, there'd be thousands, and it's me just sending the same YouTube videos to a bunch of friends, being like, "Yo, Junot's Jesus, and he's got
Oh my God. Well, so I don't know him like you do, right? And one of the questions that I was asking Ramoy, I was like, I really wish that in the story where he talks about, his his own experience with being raped when he was younger, that he talked about, that he kind of linked it to the hundreds of thousands of people who get raped every day. Because that story was really, really personal, which was great because it's an insight into somebody, obviously this Pulitzer Prize winning author who's revered and who people were really this story, people were so grateful. You were grateful about that. I know a couple more people, and men especially, who were grateful that he told the story. So I think it's really great, and I appreciate the personal aspect of it, and because everything that's been happening, I was I really wish that he had mentioned that in the story. And Ramon was like, "What's up with the panels? All the panels that he's been doing and stuff." And I'm wondering, my question to you also is that in his writing? Because I think one of the other things that comes up a lot when you research this or whatever is people are "Oh, don't hate on the writing, hate the writer." Right? So all of the stories and everything that he's put out up until this moment should not be, discounted because of his issue, basically things that he did back in the day that he has supposedly tried to atone for, who he has spoken to. You said before that he's also mentioned during his speaking engagements and stuff, how he he basically acknowledged the fact that he was abused, and he has done some abusing as well, and he acknowledged that and not tried to excuse himself for it. So I think it's interesting because my question is I haven't really read a lot of Junot Diaz's writing, and I think because people do get to know him through his literature more so than panels or whatever speaking engagements he does or whatever, I do wonder if that's in his writing.
I'll say this, like, I don't know if we ever have to hate the writer, but we definitely do need to hate the actions and challenge the actions and then hold the writer and hold this. This is what has to happen for a lot of this conversation. It's not about hating necessarily the person, but it's definitely about holding that person, especially with the person in power, responsible and accountable for said actions. But what's happening with this conversation that I will definitely kind of unfortunately or fortunately, like, die on my cross for is that, like, Junot is consistent, whether it's in his short fiction or his novels or whether it's in his panels, talking about how people can be victimizers, and in this case Junot, abusing his place of power, but also be victims as well, which he was, as a young child raped, and part of this colonial project that it was the Dominican experience, or is the Dominican experience. And a lot of men within this conversation that we're trying to cultivate is like, how can men access support and a stronger emotional well-being, and while being the survivors of trauma, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse that men go through as children, and then partition off like it didn't happen, bury it deep, and then all their actions in their adulthood channel into, from that trauma that's suppressed, channel into violence and, into these unhealthy, unsafe performances and roles of authority that is masculinity.
And I'll say that, in finding out, so, like, do you know what happened with Zinzi Clemens, like how she came out? So she was on Twitter, whatever.
At that panel,
and
right?
she was at the panel.
In Australia, yeah.
She was at the panel, and, it was shocking, actually. I mean, maybe it wasn't shocking. I mean, obviously, like, he was on a panel. He's, like, this revered man, whatever. But, like, when she started questioning him about it, people, like, basically wanted her to back off. Sure. And it's like, I understand, obviously, like, that specific context. I think it makes it tough to be like, okay, well, Junot, I think you need to answer for yourself right now. And, like, at the people's court, like, I get that.
Yeah, so for context, like, what happened was there was a panel in Australia where Junot was talking, speaking, answering questions, and ZZ Clemens comes up to the mic and brings to light, like, what Junot had done to her in the past. She says it publicly on mic, and it becomes almost to a point where the audience defends Junot in front of her, and like it forces the audience to pick a side, and a side picks the side of the
acclaimed author.
Yeah, the dude. And that's what Samantha's talking about, right? Like, you're talking about changing the context, where in that moment it almost shifted strictly to these roles, or to these ideas and rules that we have in society, where men are seen as the elevated humans and they get the right to be protected, and, like, their esteem can't be challenged, while versus the woman who is subhuman, and, like, she's just a crazy woman, and, like, let's pay her no mind right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also, like, this kind of, like, domination kind of effect, which is exactly, like, there's no way that interaction could have gone any differently in the society that we live in right now.
So
there's just not.
Just to push a little bit on that, like, what does that look like for it to change? Like, what are you talking about when you're talking about the environment needs to change?
What I mean is, when we're talking about, for me, it's all about equality. When we're talking about equality, it means, like, yeah, of course, we're in a situation right now where, you've got panelists who are obviously experts at something, talking about something that they're experts at, right? So there's obviously going to be a level of subordination there, at least within, like, an intellectual realm, right? But when we're talking about equality, like, the interaction that they were describing was not in that context. They were talking about a human-to-human interaction. So, like, why is she... I mean, the fact that they're like, don't question him about this right now, leave him alone, blah, blah, blah. Like, that is invalidating her experience. Sure. And validating his. Or validating, not even necessarily his experience, because he kind of admitted that it was wrong, right? So it's validating his position over her experience.
No, absolutely.
And what it looks like, I think, to have a conversation, like an environment
where everyone's on equal footing,
where people are on equal footing, is where we're not validating positions, we're validating experiences, we're validating humanity, we're validating people. Because when we're looking at people's experiences rather than, like, their positions, who they appear to be on the outside, or whatever accolades or whatever they have, what we're missing is their humanity. And honestly, that would transfer over to Junot Diaz as well. As, like, you're an acclaimed author and you talk about, like, various experiences and all the things you've gone through or whatever. But I think that part of that also has yielded to him. He was silent for a really long time about it, right? And I think that part of it has to do with the fact that his position is validated over his experience and who he is as a human being.
That has to be the goal with all these conversations. It's not to have like a knee-jerk reaction or like a thoughtless kind of like emotional reaction, but to create a space for all of us. And this is not me just kind of like being extra thoughtful because this is Juno, but this is the point of our conversation, right? Is for everyone to be able to have equal footing, for men not to be stuck in this performance of hyper masculinity and not being able to access their emotions or their pain or their trauma, or for cisgendered women to be treated as equals, like, or for anybody on the spectrum to be treated with an ounce of humanity, right? And that's where we're hoping to push this conversation, is always towards equality and for thoughtfulness and reconciliation.
Yeah, and it's going to take all of us. Like, when we say equality, it doesn't just mean like women getting paid just as much, women, no longer being treated as objects. It definitely means that, like, this is not an either or conversation. In order for those things to happen, men also have to be humanized, right? And like, what that does look like is support. What it also looks like is accountability. As a human being, it's not okay for you to act like that. It's not. For the people who are saying, like, for the guys who are saying, like, I'm not a Harvey Weinstein because, I don't have a hella money or whatever. I don't have this, I don't have that. You have to acknowledge the other ways that you have privilege over and in some ways can use that privilege to dominate others. I just think that is where it starts, because once we are able to actually own that for ourselves, then we can hold other people accountable. And then we can actually start to create a process where we can actually see what equality might look like and how we can put that in place, like how we can actually be the ones to actualize it.
I think what you're speaking to is like having the ability to kind of honestly look backwards and look at yourself and see your reflection and see where you are in the world and see kind of the places where you do have privilege. You can always see the places where you've been the victim and where you don't have a leg up, but it's important to like thoughtfully and honestly look at yourself and find your privilege. And I think that's what's cool about the next segment we got up. It's the Teddy Perkins Champagne Papi segment where I sat down with a country musician out of Nashville named Ryan Culwell, and he talks about his experience, yes, as being a male, but coming from kind of a lower class background, growing up in oil country Texas, and how that's informed his fathering of, I think, 4 beautiful daughters now, and the role he plays as being a father and a partner with his wife in Nashville. So up next, we got Teddy Perkins / Champagne Papi with Ryan Culwell.
Thanks, y'all.
So today on the phone, I have... You're a singer-songwriter, I think is accurate enough term. Singer-songwriter, country musician, Americana musician. I don't know. We got Ryan Culwell on the line, and he's here to talk about fatherhood. But a good place to start is that last time I saw you, Ryan, it was here in New York City. It was actually Father's Day night this last year, 2017. And you were playing a show in the Lower East Side. And that's quite a contrast for Father's Day. You in NYC alone and your family in Nashville. And I guess I want to start there. What was, not just that experience of Father's Day in New York, but kind of always having to be on the road and away from the family when you're pursuing this music and this career.
It's rough sometimes, but to be honest, I haven't been touring that much. Part of that is because I have kids, and part of that is just the way the record cycle works sometimes. That doesn't mean that it doesn't kind of call me away even when I'm in Nashville. Even if there's, like, I would live in 1,000 square feet with 5 women. So I'm really fighting for a chance to play the guitar or write a song or whatever I have to do that day for music. So sometimes it's just as difficult to be in New York City as it is in the next room, but my younger self would have flipped out. I'm getting a little older now. I'm just learning to absorb constant interruption, and then on the other hand, when I have to be gone or set a boundary where I'm like, I'm at work, even if the door's just closed, it can be difficult. On my girls, we homeschool them, so the 2 oldest, they're 8, 6, 2.5, and just a couple months old or something like that. Actually, I had 3 daughters when we talked in New York, and then We just recently had this fourth, and so
Wow, congratulations.
yeah, thank you. But it can be a wild experience trying to teach them that I have to go, and that it's actually better for me to go and explain to an 8-year-old why it's better for dad to go pursue his dream than it is for dad to grind it out in a cubicle somewhere and hate his life and show you that's what life is about.
Well, I mean, let's like I've always had a problem with talking about it. It's just like I'm pursuing a dream, or like it just kind of sounds like a cute hobby at times, or something that is for some becomes a reality, but for some is just this pursuit, right? But you make something beautiful, and I'm not. It's not hyperbole. Like the music is great, and it talks about a specific place in that in and of itself. That particularity is what makes it so special. And I guess you said you do explain it to your 8-year-old, or you do explain it to your kids, but what does that explanation sound like?
It looks more like, I mean, I would do the same thing if I was working construction or something. Going to work with some sort of joy and some sort of intention. So you're not just like, well, hell, I got to go back to work, shit to bed, let's do this. Letting them see on my face and explaining to them, like, we have like really pragmatic, practical conversations where kids can ascend to a lot higher level of thinking than we give them credit to. So I speak to them like adults a lot of times, and I tell them too, like, I'm doing this for you, but also sometimes I just need to go have fun. And that's okay because I am a person too.
Right.
Which leads to like talking about, when you thought your folks were heroes, like I thought my dad was some sort of invincible hero growing up. And I just wish they would have broke that seal earlier so that when you see him in the real light as you get older, specifically the men in your life, like for me anyway, when I saw my dad in a real light, like as an adult, it's like, oh, you're a person. You're a completely different person than I even knew you were. You have cracks and problems and, faults. And so I just try to be honest with them and show them those kind of things. Those kind of conversations can flow right into each other,
Well,
Dad needs to go have fun.
I think that's a good point, and I think that's an interesting point. Not only is your father now a person to you, but you're a father to your child, and I guess maybe you know yourself better, more or less as a person now in that kind of 3-generation span. What have you learned now that you're a parent and a father? What have you learned more about your dad, or what more grace or forgiveness do you give your dad, or what more, even the opposite, kind of frustrations or resentment do you have with your father?
I used to be bitter. My dad worked a lot, like a crazy amount, and he was gone a lot. When I was very, very young, even when I was, I don't know, he always worked a lot. Let's say 70 hours a week on the average.
That's a lot.
And then sometimes he'd be over the road, and so he'd be gone for a while. He drove a truck for some years. He worked in the oil field a lot. So there's a temptation to have resentment over that. There's some other things that kind of come up in the culture of the oil field that are pretty rough that I didn't understand. And I was pissed off about it for many years, but never like some kid that's like, my dad was gone. Like, whatever. I knew he had to go do what he had to do. There were things that he did that at the time I thought were evil. And now that I look back, I think, wow, that was a beautiful sacrifice. Like, holy shit, you probably didn't want to do all the things that I held against you. You didn't want to do them. You actually did them for me. So something I used to count as a mark against me, I actually think like, wow, he was loving me, You're like, oh, my dad was gone. Like, yeah, your dad loved you. He put food on the table. Like, I never went without, and it wasn't easy, If you work in the oil field in the 80s and watch it go from boom to bust, that just means if you want to keep putting food on the table, you got to work 2 or 3 times as hard. And, that's not hyperbole either. That's talking about a lot of sacrifice.
Okay, so you make music. Growing up in Texas, music, whether any part of America, music played a huge part in the culture of informing how I lived my life as a boy and now as a man. Whether it's shitty rock or pop or even a little bit of country, those bands and those songs, they played a role in how I saw and lived in our world. So, but to fast forward now, you're making the music now, and your music may be about a place, but it's still has notes and words and calls back to music of the past and is about the present. So it informs people, and more importantly, it can potentially inform men or boys or people how to live their masculinity. Do you ever feel that way responsibility? I mean, especially right now, like where the culture's at with masculinity and manliness.
I feel like you can listen to my last record that way, and it's filled with the shapes of men. Like, this is what it looks like to be this kind of man. This is what it looks like to be this kind of man. Now, I don't know that anybody's really being informed. Just throw myself under the bus. I don't. Who's listening to it that way? I hope somebody is. I believe we absorb the things we're listening to, regardless of intention. So maybe somebody's gleaning some of these things. That last record too, though, if you watch it, there's a man that wants to kill himself. There's a man that wants to go to war. There's a man that wants to fight. There's a man that lays down and gives up. There's a man that will die for you. There's all of these different shapes of men, and it's the thing. Where we came from, where you and I came from, it's a really drastic. When you see the male posture is really dramatic there. It's masculinity, all this stuff. And so I think there's a lot of good in that, and I think there's a lot of BS in that too. So, if you listen to that last record and you think, I'm basically praising how hard we fight. And those are some tough people, and those are some tough men. But in the end, it's not enough. Like, being tough, who cares? Like, you're not tough enough. Like, something's going to bowl you over.
Sure.
And so when you think about masculinity, it's like, yeah, be strong and be tough for the people around you, but also be open that, like, something is going to beat you. Then what are you going to do then if the only posture you have is like, I'm the biggest, baddest, manliest man? It's like, well, you're not going to do much. You're going to get your ass handed to you.
No,
You know?
and I think that there's something to keep in mind, especially with your music and a lot of stuff when it comes to culture and the pop culture and the storytelling that we absorb, is that a lot of the stuff can represent something, but it's not trying to glorify it or mandate it as what the creator's truth is, right? So you wrote this music that's about a particular place, and a lot of the men in that place and the men you grew up admiring or just kind of living under, who were strong, stubborn, bootstrap Texans, right? But you not just write about it in like a glorification way, but you write it in a way that it shows the brokenness of that too, and it communicates that so beautifully in the music, and hopefully, like, not only is that informing the listener of how to be a man, quote unquote, or how to be hyper masculine, but what the pitfalls can be also that attributed to that hyper masculinity.
Yeah, because we live in this culture. It's like you turn on TV and everybody's flexing and rah. It's like wearing their tap out shirts and doing their thing, which is cool. Do your thing. I don't mind. But I go home and cry, and I think those things are one of those isn't. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I think our strength is also born out of walking in the light, with each other and admitting our weaknesses and talking them through, and not wearing them on our sleeves. Like, it's not the first thing I lead with, but I think it's important to growth, and I think it's important to the people around us.
Well, to speak back to that kind of Texas bootstrap cowboy man, you were a boy growing up there, and you grew up there, and I grew up there, and hormonal boys say things and do things that we can do. And
sure.
But now that you have, 4 daughters, that's 4 daughters.
It's a different world.
They're going to be teenagers. They're going to be young women in this world. And knowing what you know of how you were a boy, and how your friends who were boys have said and acted, how does that change the way you kind of see masculinity, manhood, but then also...
But man, I'm giving away all our secrets. Like, I'm teaching them, like, a boy's going to do this or do that,
Well, I mean, to just kind of piggyback there, what's the most kind of exciting thing, or maybe the worst worrying thing when it comes to, like, raising daughters right now, meaning coming out of what 2017 kind of the benchmark year it was when it came to sexual assault and sexual misconduct and women stepping forward and kind of having the platform and space to do so?
I don't know. That's a big one. There's nothing, like, there's a war coming my way, you know, if I want to view it that way. There's also something beautiful coming my way in them growing up. But there's a lot of pitfalls. I don't know. I just keep moving forward. I don't know what else I can do. I don't even know how to process it. I got to have some faith. I got to have some faith in them. I got to have some faith in myself and what we're doing as parents. I'm married to maybe the best person I've ever met. And so she's giving them a lot of things as a woman that I can't even begin to comprehend or articulate. I don't really even remember the question now, but I'm trying to give them everything they can so that they can be strong, independent people. But I also don't want them so independent that I don't want independence to them to look like they don't need community.
To kind of slowly wrap it up, what are your thoughts on masculinity, or what is masculinity to you, Ryan?
Well, like for me, I have to think of it in context of my home life. First, like that's the first thing that hits me. I have 4 daughters. I have a wonderful wife. So masculinity to me has to kind of define itself, but it also, there it is, up next to what it means to be a woman constantly in my life. So the main thing that I think that I find important is being the one that'll lead the way in sacrificing. Like, I'll take the licks. If there's any way that I have an advantage, which I'm a middle-class white male with broad shoulders, there's a lot of ways that I'm privileged. Being a masculinity in the world is using all those strengths to protect people, to give to anybody that doesn't have those privileges. And I'm not saying women can't do that. They're going through something. I'm like, the amount of sacrifice involved in just being a woman naturally is, it's not really something they choose. It's just part of their nature, and they do it. It's very loving, and it's very kind, and it means a lot to the world. I think as a man, you have to choose those things, because, like, I don't have to, like, you know, if you're taking childbirth, I don't have to go through any of it. You know, a lot of men just walk away from it. But for me, when I'm going to sacrifice, it's something I have to choose. So I need to constantly be throwing myself in front of the bus, or whatever metaphor you want to use, I don't know, for my family. So, like, that's the working, or that's the, like, no, I'm not going to do the things I necessarily want to do, or, like, I'm going to be locked out of the bathroom. Like, there's little bitty sensible things, but there's also things like, I need to sacrifice that bravado thing too, because that just doesn't play well in my house. Like, it doesn't do them anything, you know? So I'm actually having to sacrifice a lot of the postures that I grew to know in the Texas Panhandle, bootstrapping guys, tough guys, sacrificing a lot of what I actually thought it meant to be a man to be better for the girls in my life, my girls.
I think a lot of people don't have that on the forefront of their brain, that sacrifice is an innate part of what we call masculinity, but it's interesting, and it's also poignant that you say that, because the way you said it, it reminds me a lot that a lot of the ways that we've created masculinity is to be sacrificial, and it's good to hear that, especially from a young man who is a father of 4 young women. Thank you again, Ryan Culwell. I appreciate you coming on to talk about fatherhood and masculinity and such. For anybody who hasn't already, you can go to iTunes and find Ryan's last album, Flatlands. It's a beautiful, incredible country and Americana album specific about a place that we grew up in, that I'm proud to have grown up in. You can catch it on iTunes. Where else can you get it?
Oh, you can get it anywhere. Just put Ryan Culwell, Culwell, in the internet. It'll come up all over the place.
Sure, you can find
Spotify, Deezer, MySpace. I don't know. People use those things.
You can also find Ryan Culwell on the Instagram, the Twitters. I'm assuming it's just at Ryan Culwell.
It is.
All right. Thank you, Ryan, so much.
You can email me. It's Ryan Culwell at iCloud or Gmail or anything really, except for Yahoo.
And he'll be waiting to field your questions or your throw him under the bus comments about fatherhood there.
There it is.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So there you have it, guys. Vermoy, thank you for the lovely segment. Thank you for all those
It was a
thoughtful
tough one,
questions.
guys. I got the grilled cheese hamburger thing still ruining my stomach, but then we had to talk about my Jesus Junot and then how complex that was. But I guess it was all healthy and important and necessary. So shout out to y'all with that.
Well, you guys, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for checking us out this week. Please let us know how you feel. Like, we just want to know, like, where you're at. Because, I mean, it's great that Vermoy and I get to come into the studio and, like, have all these thoughtful conversations. But really, the only reason why we're doing it is because we're really hoping that, you know, it can create this path to equality that we're looking for, right? So yeah, please let us know how you feel. Our email is masculinitypodcast@whoistheo.com. We're on Twitter at masculinitypod, and on Facebook at masculinity podcast.
Always with a K.
Always with a K, you know, because that mask is just thriving. Juno talked about the mask actually in like a lot, which I appreciate it. Anyway, so, you know,
yeah, get ready for it. Samantha's got like a hell of a lot of good episodes coming out. We got a diverse cast of guests coming on in the next couple of weeks. So
that's very exciting.
Get excited. Pay attention on the socials and on the websites, and
yes,
we'll get it out there too.
We're staying steady for a while, so thanks for listening. My name is Samantha Nzesi. My name is Samantha Lou Nzesi.
My name is Vermoy George Phillip. The first.
And this has been Masculinity. Thank you for listening.
Peace.
Ciao.